Hello, Bill. What's up?
Queer, directed by Luca Guadagnino, was the first film I watched at Tiff this year. This is Luca's second film to be released in 2024, and here he's working with a lot of the same people he worked with on Challengers 2, not just Potion Seller. This movie was actually only even made because Luca gave Justin Kuritzkis the original novella by William S. Burroughs to read while they were in production for Challengers. And though that quick turnaround and having the same writer, editor, cinematographer, and composers might make you think these movies have a lot in common, they really couldn't be any more different from one another. Queer, the film, is in essence the sequel to Call Me By Your Name that Luca always wanted to make but couldn't because of you-know-who doing you-know-what. In many ways, this film feels like a spiritual successor to that film, as Queer carries forward with it a lot of these similar ideas surrounding unrequited yet loving relationships between men of significant age disparities. The setting has just transitioned from 1980s northern Italy to 1940s Mexico City, as well we have a slight shift in perspective too. Where most of the time in Call Me By Your Name, we were seeing the relationship through the eyes of its younger participant, here it's the exact opposite. Daniel Craig stars as William Lee, alongside the up-and-coming but very promising Drew Strachey as Eugene Allerton, a young man who Lee quickly becomes infatuated with while fleeing America to escape a drug charge. The two do wonders on screen building this relationship together. Craig is particularly gifted at digging into Lee's many insecurities with very small, simple body language. But I really loved how Strachey kept the character of Eugene at such a distance for so much of the film. We are, after all, seeing him through Lee's eyes, so it's fitting how elusive Eugene always seems to come across, both to him and to us, the audience. Each actor is pretty understated in their performance, but that doesn't do anything to temper the, as should be expected by now, tender and incredibly real romance that Luca has crafted once again. It might be easy to relegate this movie into the same category that much of Luca's other work on young love and sexuality falls into. Not to say his work in this area has been bad, just to say that it's kind of become routine of Luca to keep making movies and TV shows about these terse, yet passionate, yet ultimately doomed young relationships over and over and over again. However, what saves Queer from becoming a stale experience for me personally is probably the William Burroughs of it all. That, and the fact that, let's just face it, Luca is a really fucking good director no matter where you put him. He could tell the same gay love story for the rest of his career, and I would be perfectly fine with it. But as evidenced by films like the Suspiria remake, Bones and All, and now Queer, he has shown himself very willing to do something bold and completely unexpected if the film calls for it. Queer gets a lot weirder than a lot of people are probably expecting, and it just gets even weirder the longer it goes on. If I were to hazard a guess, this was probably done in an effort to keep up with the source material. Burroughs could, after all, be pretty gross, vulgar, and off-putting. Not in a bad way, mind you, it was just his style. However, it's not really a style I would attribute to Luca, or coming off of Challengers, one I would attribute to Justin Kuritzkis either. But I was wrong, because this movie really goes for it in its final act, and I'm sure it will not work for many, but it's what elevated this movie into becoming something really special to me. Without spoiling, there's this one crazy moment that almost crosses the line into full body horror, but with everything that's happened up to this point and how much the movie has been building to this particular scene, it just all feels so appropriate. And the information this sequence reveals about our characters is so monumental that it really feels like it couldn't be told any other way. And furthermore, beyond the crazier moments in the third act, what really made me appreciate this movie as an advancement on the same type of narrative Luca's been recreating since Call Me, is that its ending is absolutely devastating, and not in a way I feel he's ever done before. The man is definitely no stranger to ending things on a dour note, but the final act of Queer, which was added in by Luca and Justin specifically for the movie, since William Burroughs' novella was actually unfinished, is so bitterly, uncompromisingly sad in a way that really surprised me, knowing it was from the guy who just wrote Challengers. I didn't really like that movie's ending that much, but I loved the ending to Queer, despite how profoundly depressing it was. There was just something so shocking about the hopelessness on display in Queer's final moments. However, within that hopelessness is also a lot of honesty, an earnest pledge for recognition both for your own sexuality and for a love that never really fully becomes what it could or should have been. To me, that really is what this movie is all about, this profound sense of loss for something that could have been great, but sadly wasn't. And now it can't ever come back again. It's been lost forever. Another fun time at the theater thanks to Luca Guadagnino. Let's cheer things up with David Cronenberg's film about his recently deceased wife. The Shrouds, directed and written by David Cronenberg, is kinda fucked up. Who could have guessed? But unlike much of Cronenberg's other work, the thrilling and chilling aspects of The Shrouds don't come from wild, gross-out body horror, but instead from the cold, inescapable reality of death and everything that comes afterwards. The film stars Vincent Cassel, Guy Pearce, and Diane Kruger, and tells the story of a man who runs an odd sort of funeral tech service which allows the bereaved to monitor the decaying remains of their loved ones as they wither away in the ground, something Cassel's Karsh has taken into use for his own dearly departed wife ad nauseum. Look, I'm not going to beat around the bush here. For those who loved Cronenberg returning to his roots for Crimes of the Future, I feel like you're going to be thoroughly disappointed in this film. Because this is Cronenberg going right back into his boring old dry-ass Cosmopolis mold. And while I liked that movie quite a bit, and while I did like The Shrouds quite a bit as well, these two films mark some of the driest material Cronenberg has ever delivered in his entire career. So I'm not going to blame anyone who's a little bummed out that after making the type of movie everyone has been waiting for him to make for decades, he followed it up with a very morose, dialogue-heavy drama that actively decides to dull itself to the rules of normal modern reality instead of reveling in the grander science fiction that Cronenberg is known for. The world presented in The Shrouds and everything that happens in it is not something that would be impossible to happen in our own world. As explained by the man himself during the Q&A after the movie, the technology for the Shroud is totally possible, and all the digression the film takes from that starting point is totally in line with what could happen if, hypothetically, someone wanted to provide a service like the one shown in the movie. And while this does mean the Shroud loses some essential Cronenbergian creativity, it makes up for it with an overloading of sincerity. This is probably the most personal film David Cronenberg has ever made, and though I wasn't fully on board with every topic of conversation he engages with in this, or the very lackadaisical way it can be presented sometimes, I also can't deny that this movie did give me a lot to think about when it comes to the physical reality of what happens after one's death. And before I get into the more darker topics present in this film, I should give the qualifier that it is actually quite a funny movie, in a weird way. It might even be the funniest Cronenberg movie. There were certainly a lot of laughs in our audience throughout, and they all felt intentional. Like a lot of the stuff that works about The Shrouds, the comedy from this script comes across well because of how realistic and down-to-earth the rest of the film is when compared with the actual subject matter being discussed. Go figure, the big topic on Cronenberg's mind is, as always, the human body. More specifically, the cadaver and what one does with it. One of the most compelling through lines of this movie is this exploration of what it means to lose someone in a purely physical sense. As expressed by blatant Cronenberg stand-in Karsh, if you've been married to someone for decades, you've likely become close enough to them physically that you've grown to understand their body, much like you might understand your own. And that sudden loss of direct physical contact that you've sustained for so long now being gone from you leaves you in this strange, emotional phantom limb state. Grief manifests in many ways, and as shown in the movie, there are many times where this crosses over into a creepy sort of possessiveness that, in the case of Karsh, extends over onto a body that never really belonged to him in the first place. But Cronenberg doesn't treat this all as inherently sinister. As the film brings up, most type of funerary customs outside cremation are about the preservation of the corpse in some way for the emotional relief of those who are still alive. And really, that is all Karsh is trying to do for much of the movie. Find some relief. Avoid having to fully say goodbye to someone who meant so much to him. The soul of his wife is gone, but her body at least remains. And Karsh would do anything to be as close to that body as he can, even if it means crawling inside the ground with her. Some of the film's most powerful moments come from these short flashbacks we see between Karsh and his wife Becca, played by Kruger in one of her 3 roles. These scenes make up the most compelling angle that the film explores. This dissection of one's grief and how it can be this awful, selfish thing, but for all the most understandably human reasons. Both Castle and Kruger do superb work in their scenes together, and Castle deserves a lot of credit for taking on a whole movie full of dialogue that's not even in his native language. Still, despite all their efforts, I cannot deny that The Shrouds was a hell of a slog to get through. One which sadly had a very sudden ending that really didn't do much to wrap things up all that effectively. It's not to say that all the plot points haven't been resolved in some manner, but it kind of feels like the movie just builds up a lot of questions and mysteries, settles on a bunch of things that may or may not be the answer, and then just calls it a day without actually confirming anything. Perhaps this says something about Cronenberg's own attitude towards death, but in full honesty, I have little idea what the resolution of this film was supposed to really mean. Again, this is a long, dry, talky movie, so perhaps I missed something. This being a late showing did the film no favors, but I can't be the only one to wonder what it was he was trying to impart to us here in these final moments. It's difficult to say, as I don't know if I'll ever really want to watch this movie again. It is a rough, confronting experience that actively peddles in the murkiest waters possible, but nevertheless, like every Cronenberg film, it certainly gave me a lot to think about, and I don't regret watching it. Also, I'm endlessly fascinated by what the public's reaction will be to this once it comes out in a wider release, especially from the Cronenberg heads. Honestly, my own Canadian bias may have influenced my lenient opinion on The Shrouds here, as this is once again David Cronenberg back filming in Toronto with a movie that is very openly and obviously set in the GTA. Canada so rarely gets to play itself in film, so anytime it happens, I'm almost always automatically on board. Oh, Canada, directed by Paul Schrader and written by Paul Schrader, stars a bunch of non-Canadians, like Richard Gere, Uma Thurman, Michael Imperioli, and Jacob Elordi. It was also shot entirely in New York. Shameful, Paul. Just fucking shameful. Unlike most other Schrader joints, however, this is not a film about a lonely man in an empty room, nor does it have the same ending as the film Pickpocket. Instead, Oh, Canada tells the story of an old, dying leftist Canadian documentarian / Vietnam draft dodger who is using an interview conducted by his longtime protege to confess all the great sins of his life before he finally passes on. The film is told entirely from the perspective of Gere's aging Leonard Fife, with intermediate flashbacks to Elordi playing a younger Fife as he confesses to the many shitty things he has done to people who matter the most to him across his long, storied existence. Like The Shrouds, this is another case of an old man making a film about death, but where that film focused on the immediate physical effects of dying, this film is all about the fear of death. More specifically, the fear of regret that comes when one knows they are soon approaching their graves. Fife is a man who has done some pretty shitty things, much of which isn't really apparent until the film gets to its very end, which is probably the first warning I should give for this movie. Oh, Canada, presents itself as being told directly from the head of the very near-death Leonard Fife, and as such can often present information in a very confusing, intentionally obtuse way, with several moments of very important plot points being dropped for several minutes, then picked up again, and then dropped again, all without ceremony or logic. This movie has the pacing of a Grandpa Simpson story. So for those of you coming away from this one a little unsure with what actually happened and what you were supposed to think of it, I wouldn't blame you. That is pretty much how I felt once the movie was over. But following Schrader's Q&A and a long conversation with a friend afterwards, I really started to appreciate what Schrader was trying to do here. Across Schrader's career, he has written many characters of questionable moral integrity. But with Leonard Fife, he has really created an especially degenerate man. Though not in a way that feels really comparable to any of his other anti-heroes. Fife is not a violent man on the edge of doing something completely insane. He's not really a loner or even much of a misanthrope. He doesn't even really have a particular ethos or ideology that guides his decisions beyond general selfishness. Fife's most shitty transgressions are also commonplace. His great sins so routine that it hardly seems worth all the histrionics he approaches confessing them with. But I think it's because of the mundane nature of what Fife does that makes his past behavior come across so much worse in the script. Most people you know don't try to assassinate presidential candidates like Travis Bickle did. But a lot of people do things like this guy does here, and all without so much as a second thought as to how these actions can affect the other people around them. Having said that, the funny thing is, Leonard is, at least on the surface, a guy who you'd probably find pretty easy to like. He's a Vietnam draft dodger. He came to Canada to become a filmmaker and brought up a bunch of film students with a new method for documentary interviews that he himself created. He made films that spoke truth to power about injustices going on in Canada during his life. Though the film barely touches on his film career, we know it contained documentaries on residential schools and the use of Agent Orange near Base Gagetown in New Brunswick. Yet, despite all those commendations, when you really get down to the actual character of this man, the person he truly reveals himself to be, you understand that he's just some horny fucking narcissist. And a lot of his supposed values don't even really seem to matter all that much to him, at least now that he's on his deathbed. Throughout his interview, Fife constantly avoids talking about his own films and seems to actively not care for more than a few of them. Fife is much more interested in himself, which translates so well to the main topic of conversation the film, and I would also guess Schrader, is most interested in exploring. That being the futility of absolution. Russell Banks' novel was titled Foregone, and it's a title that fits just as well for the film as the one they eventually went with. Everything Fife is trying to do is pointless because all the actions of his life are already a foregone conclusion. He doesn't have any time left in him to really do anything about it now. In his last moments, as Fife undergoes this interview, all he's really doing is attempting to make himself feel better about how shitty he was to people just before he croaks. In practice, though, he spends the interview revealing horrible truths that will scar his wife and friends just before he leaves, and also repeatedly insults his own protege who is currently conducting this oh-so-important interview for him. As the film also reveals through some choice editing, what Fife thinks he's saying during the interview might not even be what's actually being said because of his delirium. There's even an added complication in that this interview is going to be subject to the protege's editing, and so it's impossible to know even if anything Fife says is going to be heard by anyone outside of the room or interpreted correctly. As the film makes clear, a director decides how to present the story, and what they choose to omit shapes the narrative just as much as what you choose to include. The truth is eventually figured out in the edit. For his whole life, the story that Leonard Fife has told to himself, to his wives, to his fans, to everyone he meets is a lie. And it always will be, no matter who is telling it. It is far too late for him to rewrite his story. In the eyes of the younger generation, he is looked up to as one of the good baby boomers who was on the right side of history for most of his life, but in actuality, he was just a regular jackass. Made some good movies way back when, but deep down, there's nothing special about this guy whatsoever. Certainly an interesting angle to see from Paul Schrader, but I'm glad he went for it. It's always great when filmmakers go for something so different from what they're known for, because you can get amazing new films like this. I loved Oh, Canada, and honestly I think it might be my favorite from the festival this year. But, as much as I would love to go on singing its praises, unfortunately there are other matters to discuss. For those of you who are just interested in the Tiff reviews, this is where we say goodbye. And to everyone else, hey! Thanks for subscribing, 5,000 of you. That was really cool, you guys. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. As some of you might have noticed, I have not uploaded anything in the last 9 months. Sorry about that. Things weren't going so great for me at the end and beginning of 2023 and 2024. Personal stuff, nothing that really involves YouTube, but during that time I wasn't really feeling like working on anything all that much. The Saints Row video had been on the back burner for weeks before I'd just decided to release it as is so I had something to put out before the end of the year. And I'm not unhappy with the final product, but there was just a lot more I wanted to say that I didn't so I could have something uploaded before the new year. If I could do it again, I probably would have talked about the other Saints Row in a lot more detail. Once that was out and 2024 came, though, I kinda just drifted for a while, not really feeling any drive to work on anything. This lasted far longer than I would have liked, but then once I finally got out of my funk and I got back to work, I quickly fell into this not very productive pattern of putting all my efforts into these big, long, elaborate video essays like the Boy and the Heron video I was talking about making before, then, after working on it for a while, realizing, shit, it's been months since I uploaded a video. This one is getting way too big and I'm spending way too much time on it. Let's work on something smaller instead that won't take as long. Then I would begin working on a new video for something more mainstream and short, like a season of a TV show, but every time I tried to write about it, new info would keep coming out in the news about stuff I was talking about, and it would mean I had to change my script or re-record audio, and then eventually while doing that enough time would pass again that nobody would even be talking about the show, movie, or shitty business practice adopted by David Vaslov anymore. So, I would just give up and go back to work on another bigger project or start a new one, and the cycle would repeat all over again. This happened multiple times this year. I've written so many more videos than I ever even uploaded in 2023, but I do not feel a fraction as satisfied with the material in any of them as I do with stuff from last year. That has, thankfully, changed as the months have gone by, and now I do have more than a few videos in the pipeline that I am pretty certain I definitely won't throw away this time probably. In all seriousness, a new video essay is coming out in October. Very sorry for the delay. Now, what does this all mean for you, though, as a potential future watcher of this channel? Probably very little, I'd think. I'm not really changing much of what I was always going to do here, and even though in the last year I've had a lot of different thoughts and ideas about what I might change with this channel in the future, I kept going back to the same thoughts and ideas I always have when I think about this channel. I never really laid this all out anywhere, but the video essays I like are simple, straightforward ones that you can just listen to in the background while you're driving or playing a game or something. No music, minimal cutting, and above all else, all the necessary information should be delivered from the dialogue, and then the video itself can serve as more of an extra garnish of context for those who want it. That's the type of stuff I like to watch and listen to, so that's still going to be what's made on this channel. And like before, it's probably going to be a mix of the longer, all-encompassing essays that offer deep dives of the entirety of a franchise or TV show, and the shorter, more review-like essays that are about a more mainstream topic, like a season of a TV show, though those will probably be fewer and far between. At the very least, you can expect some Tiff reviews every year when the festival comes back. I've been going for almost a decade already, and I have no plans of stopping in the near or far future. And I even got a Letterboxd account now that I've been quietly updating ever since January. Check it out if that's something you use or care about. More than anything though, before this video finishes, I would just like to offer a recommitment to the original point of this channel existing in the first place, which is, and always has been, to give myself a platform to bitch about how the many artists that make up the entertainment industry are constantly shit on by the owners who profit off their work. To my fellow communards who chose to subscribe to me because of the inverted stars and antlers, no need to worry, that is never not going to be a topic of conversation on Critical Positivity. Not unless every below-the-line worker in film suddenly starts getting treated way better than they have ever historically been treated. There is plenty about the entertainment industry that's worth cherishing and upholding, but there is a lot more about it that fucking sucks. By speaking honestly about how these two forces interact with each other, maybe we can better understand why it is we have the entertainment industry we have today. Both the good parts and the bad. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you watch the next one too. Goodbye.